In 1921, a mob of 10,000 whites descended on the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, then the richest black neighborhood in the entire United States. Hundreds of black residents were murdered in what became the deadliest massacre on American soil since the Civil War. The Tulsa Massacre is one of the most tragic and disturbing incidents of racial violence in U.S. history, yet it's rarely mentioned in the history books. Today, we're going to take a look at how a racist mob destroyed America's richest black neighborhood. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what stories of historical crime you would like to hear more about. Now, we're going back 100 years to Oklahoma. An early 20th century oil boom drew people to Oklahoma. By 1920, the population of Tulsa was over 100,000 and growing, with many of the new residents being black. Existing racial tensions were escalating, and whites who were concerned about having to let black people into their neighborhoods for the first time didn't exactly roll out the welcome wagon. Instead, they sprang into action, and in August of 1916, the city passed a residential segregation ordinance. The new law, once enacted, prevented blacks from living on any block where 75% of the other residents were white. Black citizens would have to look for a home elsewhere. The black district of Tulsa was called Greenwood. Despite legal segregation, the neighborhood and its population thrived. Greenwood had 2 independent newspapers and was filled with black-owned businesses, including the largest black-owned hotel in the country. Booker T. Washington was so impressed with Greenwood, he called it the Negro Wall Street. It all started on May 30th, 1921. When a 19-year-old shoeshiner named Dick Rowland entered the Drexel Building, an office located at 319 South Main Street in Tulsa. He needed to use a public bathroom, but because he was black, segregation laws restricted him to using facilities located at the top of the building. Getting there required taking the elevator, and that's where Dick encountered the elevator operator, a 17-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. Whether or not Dick Rowland and Sarah Page knew each other is a matter of debate. What happened in the elevator that day is also unknown. An article in the Tulsa Tribune reported that Rowland attacked Page, scratching her hands and face and tearing her clothes. Conversely, author Mary Parrish, writing less than a year after the events, reported that the black man had merely stepped on the girl's shoes by accident. What is known is that a clerk in a nearby department store heard what he thought was a woman screaming. He went to investigate and saw a young black man run from the building. Then he found Page in the elevator. She was said to be in a state of distress, so the clerk concluded she had been attacked and reported as much to the police. The contents of Sarah Page's statements to the police have been lost, but she did decline pressing charges, and no manhunt was conducted. Rowland, however, knew that the mere accusation of attacking a white woman could make him the target of an angry white mob. He fled to his mother's house in Greenwood. Rowland was located by police and arrested shortly thereafter. The white-owned Tulsa Tribune, known for its sensationalist takes, broke the story in their afternoon edition with the incendiary headline, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator." Rumors that Rowland would be lynched spread like wildfire, and by 7:30 p.m. on May 31st, hundreds of white residents had gathered outside the courthouse. Only a year earlier, a small mob lynched a white murder suspect named Roy Belton, and the newly elected local sheriff, Willard M. McCullough, was looking to avoid a similar incident. At approximately 8:30 p.m., 3 white men entered the courthouse and demanded Rowland be handed over to them. McCullough refused and sent the men back out. By 9:30 p.m., the crowd had swelled to thousands. The sheriff was vastly outnumbered. It was about this time that a group of 50 to 60 armed black citizens arrived to support the sheriff. He turned down their offer, but their arrival had prompted many of the white citizens to head home for their own guns. Some even attempted to steal arms from a nearby National Guard armory. At 10 p.m., a second group of armed black citizens arrived to support the sheriff, but were turned away as well. As they were leaving the courthouse, a white man approached a black war veteran, calling him a racial slur, and tried to take his gun. A shot rang out, and then all hell broke loose. Both sides began to fire, but the small group of black citizens was outnumbered 20-1, and they retreated towards Greenwood. The gunfight followed them the whole way, and the whites used it as an excuse to massacre innocent black citizens. One unarmed black man was even chased into a theater and murdered on the stage. Calling the incident a Negro uprising, the local police deputized almost 500 white men, many of whom had been members of the lynch mob that had created the whole situation in the first place. The new deputies were instructed to arm themselves and were then ordered to shoot blacks in the streets. Meanwhile, a white mob headed for Greenwood. The mob descended on Greenwood with a fury, burning houses and businesses. By the morning of June 1st, the mob had grown to approximately 10,000 white citizens. They poured into the district, looting, destroying, and murdering black residents by the hundreds. Other armed whites were breaking into black homes and arresting the residents. Any who dared resist would be immediately killed. Buck Colbert Franklin, a Tulsa resident and lawyer, was a witness to the destruction of Greenwood. He recalled hearing something that sounded like hail falling on the roof of his office building. He looked out the window and saw a hotel on fire. It was burning from the top down. Then he noticed a second building, and then a third, then others, all burning from the top down. As he stood and watched, he noticed planes circling overhead, maybe a dozen or more in number. Through a thick cloud of smoke, he could see them drop what he called burning turpentine balls on the tops of various businesses and homes. Immediately, he knew all too well why every burning building first caught from the top. At the same time, other reports hold that white men fired guns from the planes, shooting black residents as they walked along the ground. The planes, as it would turn out, were military biplane trainers from World War I that had lifted off from Curtis Southwest Field, just outside the city. Law enforcement officials subsequently said the planes were protection, but the survivors of the massacre knew better. The mob burned everything: hotels, restaurants, grocery stores, doctors' offices, pharmacies, a public library, a dozen churches, and over 1,000 private homes. As Franklin watched, he wondered where Tulsa's splendid fire department was, and considered the possibility the city was in league with the racist mob. By the time the sun came up, the National Guard had arrived to restore order. However, instead of targeting the white mob, many of the troops went after the black residents instead. Over 6,000 people were arrested and imprisoned at Convention Hall, and not a single one was white. On June 1, 1921, Greenwood was still burning. Thousands of black residents had been imprisoned, hundreds more were dead, and to add insult to injury, the Morning Tulsa Daily World's headline for the day was, "Two Whites Dead in Race Riots." The article claimed that 500 armed whites had heroically held off 1,000 armed blacks. Later in the day, a different headline added fuel to the fire by exclaiming, "Many more whites shot." The black lives that had been lost were completely disregarded by the media, and the stage was set for the grand jury to hang the blame for the whole thing on the people of Greenwood. The Stratford Hotel was the largest business of its kind owned by a black person in the U.S. prior to the Civil Rights era. Stratford's hotel had 54 rooms equipped with luxuries like crystal chandeliers and was worth somewhere in the area of $75,000, which is roughly the equivalent of about $1 million current dollars. Nonetheless, it was destroyed along with the rest of Greenwood during the massacre. In a just world, Stratford would have received restitution for his loss, but 1921 Tulsa was anything but just. Stratford was arrested, along with 69 other men, and charged with inciting the riot that ultimately burned down his own hotel. He would later jump bail and flee the state to avoid being lynched. Stratford went on to be a lawyer in Chicago and never returned to Oklahoma. He was finally cleared of the charges against him in 1996, 60 years after he passed away. By the time it was all over, the neighborhood once known as the Black Wall Street was uninhabitable. Black businessmen and homeowners were denied relief by the courts, and their insurance companies refused to cover the damage. Dick Rowland was never charged in connection with the incident in the elevator. He eventually left Tulsa and never returned. Looking back, many speculate that the alleged attack on Sarah Page was merely a pretext for Tulsa's white residents to destroy a successful black community they had always hated. The massacre became a celebrated event in some quarters. Postcards commemorating the violence and destruction even circulated among some white collectors. As Paul Gardullo, a curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, points out, the truth of the matter has to do with the threat that Black power, Black economic power, Black cultural power, Black success pose to individuals and the whole system of white supremacy. In 2001, an investigation held the city partly responsible for the Greenwood Massacre, finding that the police themselves were actively involved in the mob violence. The city of Tulsa was ordered to pay reparations to the survivors of the massacre and their descendants. As of 2020, they have still not been paid. So what do you think? Will justice ever be served? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.